A millionaire CEO brought a fake date to humiliate his ex, but ended up falling for her. Instead, hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The chandeliers glowed like constellations above a ballroom that could have been mistaken for a palace. Guests dressed in couture gowns and tailored suits clinked glasses of champagne priced higher than a month's salary for most people. A string quartet filled the room with delicate music, the kind that set the stage for a night of elegance and whispered judgments. At the tall golden doors, the young millionaire CEO appeared. Every camera flashed, every whisper hushed. He was the man who once had everything: wealth, influence, and the fiancée who symbolized his perfect life. But tonight, he did not arrive alone. On his arm was a woman who did not belong to this world of glass towers and polished diamonds. She wore a simple dress, borrowed from a consignment shop. The fit was not perfect, and the shoes pinched her feet, but she walked with a steady grace that made the crowd pause. Heads turned, eyebrows arched. Someone muttered under their breath, "Who is she?" Another voice said, "A waitress, perhaps? This cannot be real." And that was exactly the point. It was not real. It was a contract. One night, one role to play, one goal: to humiliate the ex who had betrayed him, and now stood across the room, shining in her engagement gown with another man's ring on her finger. The ex's smile faltered when she saw them. Her fingers stiffened around her champagne glass. The millionaire CEO smirked, leaning closer to his hired date, whispering just loud enough for his ex to see the intimacy he wanted her to believe. His eyes said what words did not. "You left me, but look at what I have now." The girl felt the weight of every stare. She was not used to crystal chandeliers, not used to marble floors that reflected her every step. She came from a world of second jobs, grocery store coupons, and late rent notices. Yet here she stood, hand in hand with a man who ruled skyscrapers. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but she refused to bow her head. Pride was the only thing she could afford, and tonight it was priceless. The room buzzed louder. Some whispered insults, cloaked as curiosity. Others pulled out their phones, capturing every moment for tomorrow's tabloids. Who is the mysterious woman with the CEO? Where did he find her? Every flash of a camera was another reminder that her life, her secret, and even her dignity could be ripped apart before midnight. Still, she held her ground. When the ex-fiancé glided closer, armed with a smile sharp enough to cut glass, the girl's heart nearly stopped. The ex looked her up and down with an expression dripping with disdain. "Interesting choice," she said smoothly, loud enough for those around to hear. "I did not realize he had changed his taste so drastically." The crowd chuckled cruelly. Heat rushed to the girl's cheeks. But before she could falter, the CEO tightened his grip around her hand. For the first time that evening, he was not performing for his ex or the crowd. He was defending her. His voice rang clear. "She is not just interesting, she is unforgettable." Gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed again, desperate to capture the moment. The ex's smile cracked for the first time, and in that crack, the girl felt an unexpected surge of power. She might have been hired. She might have been here under false pretenses. But for one heartbeat, standing under the chandeliers, she felt like more than a contract. She felt like someone who could change the script of this entire night. And what neither of them knew, what no contract could predict, was that this act of vengeance would spark a fire neither pride nor wealth could control. The whispers in the ballroom followed them long after the first confrontation. Every step she took beside him felt heavier, like the marble floor itself judged her with each click of her shoes. Yet she did not stumble. She held her chin high, because lowering her gaze would be surrender. And surrender was never part of the contract. But who was this girl, really? To the glittering guests, she was a mystery draped in borrowed fabric. To him, she was a shield, a pawn in his war against the ex who had betrayed him. And to herself, she was simply a daughter trying to survive. Her name was Claire. She worked double shifts as a waitress in a small diner near the edge of the city, the kind where black coffee was endlessly refilled, and tips barely paid the gas bill. Rent notices piled on her kitchen counter. Her mother's medical prescriptions cost more than her weekly income. Every night she counted every dollar, and still, it was never enough. So when a stranger in a tailored suit slid a contract across her table, she hesitated but did not refuse. The stranger was none other than Alexander, the young millionaire CEO who owned a skyline of glass towers but could not control the humiliation of losing his fiancée. His reputation had been bruised, and in his world, reputation was more valuable than gold. The board members questioned his judgment, investors whispered about weakness, and his ex had chosen a rival to parade her new engagement, like a victory march. He could not allow her to win, so he needed a weapon. Not a business deal, not a legal strike, but something far more personal. He needed a woman on his arm who would shake the ground beneath his ex's perfect heels. A woman who looked nothing like the sculpted models that filled society pages. Someone unexpected. Someone authentic. Claire signed because the money meant survival. It was supposed to be simple. Show up, act the part, smile at the cameras, and then disappear back into obscurity. The agreement was cold, written in ink and stamped with his corporate seal. No emotion, no attachment, no complications. She told herself she could endure one night of stares and laughter if it meant paying her mother's hospital bills. But as the music played, and the eyes of the city's elite burned into her skin, she began to understand the cost was not only her pride. She was stepping into a firestorm far larger than she imagined. Alexander watched her closely. At first, she was just a tool in his game, a living answer to the insult his ex had dealt him. Yet something about the way she straightened her back beneath the crystal chandeliers unsettled him. She was not performing for him. She was not pretending for the crowd. She was simply being herself, unyielding in a room designed to break her. That confidence was not in the contract, and it gnawed at him. Meanwhile, his ex circled like a predator in designer heels, her eyes flashing with the hunger to humiliate the woman on his arm. Claire sensed it. She could almost taste the venom behind the ex's smile. Still, she clung to her dignity, answering polite greetings with a soft voice, refusing to shrink, even when every glance screamed she did not belong. The night dragged on, filled with introductions, half-truths, and champagne flutes that never emptied. Every handshake tested her. Every smirk dared her to crack. And through it all, Alexander played his part. The powerful CEO flaunting his new companion. But beneath the mask, his thoughts betrayed him. Why did it matter to him if she stumbled? Why did it sting when the crowd mocked her? Outside the ballroom windows, the city pulsed with neon life. Inside, the war of pride and appearances raged on. She was fighting to survive. He was fighting to win. Neither of them expected that the line between survival and victory was about to blur. Stay with me, because this was only the beginning of a contract signed in ink but destined to be rewritten by something far more dangerous than revenge. It was about to be rewritten by love. The story of their contract did not begin under the glow of chandeliers, but in a quiet corner booth of a small diner where Claire poured black coffee for strangers until her hands ached. Alexander had chosen the place carefully. He knew she worked there. He had studied her schedule, her background, and her desperation. When he slid into that booth in his tailored suit, he looked completely out of place, like a king visiting a crumbling village. Claire set a chipped mug of coffee in front of him, her apron stained from the day's rush. "What does someone like you want here?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder bound in leather. He laid it on the table, and with a flick of his wrist, he opened it to reveal a crisp contract. Her eyes scanned the pages, and the words hit harder than the heat from the kitchen. Compensation, $50,000. Role, pretend partner. Duration, 1 month or until otherwise dissolved. She almost laughed, almost pushed it back toward him, but then the numbers pressed against her reality. $50,000. That was enough to keep her mother's treatments going for a year. Enough to pay the overdue rent. Enough to silence the constant fear that had been gnawing at her since her father left. Alexander's voice was calm, clinical, like he was presenting a merger proposal. "You will attend events with me. You will be photographed with me. You will act as if you belong in my world. In return, You will receive this payment in full. The agreement is simple. There are rules." Claire folded her arms, masking her trembling hands. "What kind of rules?" He leaned forward, his eyes sharp as glass. "No personal questions, no interference in my business, no contact beyond the events required. And the most important," his pause was deliberate, a blade sharpened by silence, "you do not fall in love with me." Her laugh escaped before she could stop it. "That will not be a problem." She signed her name at the bottom of the page, her pen scratching against paper like sealing of fate. Alexander slid a check across the table, the ink fresh, the numbers life-altering. And just like that, her life was no longer her own. From that night forward, the deal bound them together. To the outside world, they would appear as a couple, but behind closed doors they were strangers forced to share the same stage. Claire told herself over and over, "It is only business. It is only survival." Yet the moment she stepped beside him into the glittering halls of power, she realized how heavy the role would be. Every flash of a camera felt like lightning striking her disguise. Every handshake felt like a test she was destined to fail. The laughter of the wealthy cut sharper than knives, but she swallowed it down, reminding herself that every insult was another dollar earned. Alexander, however, saw what others could not. He saw the way she straightened her spine when mocked, the way she met arrogance with quiet resolve. He had expected compliance, a puppet on a string. What he found instead was a woman who refused to break. Still, the contract loomed between them like a wall of stone. She had her rules, he had his pride, and both had signed their names to a lie. But here is the truth. No contract can contain. Paper cannot control the human heart. The ink may bind the terms, but it cannot bind what grows in silence between stolen glances and unspoken thoughts. Stay with me, because their agreement was meant to end in 30 days. Yet every day that passed pulled them closer to a revelation no signature could prevent. The first true test of their arrangement came sooner than either of them expected. The ink on the contract was barely dry when Alexander announced that Claire would accompany him to the grand engagement gala of his ex. He did not ask. He informed her, his tone cold, his jaw unyielding. Claire's heart sank. She had imagined small dinners, maybe a few charity functions, where her presence would be tolerated, but not scrutinized. A high society gala was something else entirely. It was the battlefield where reputations were forged and destroyed, and Alexander intended to march her directly into the fire. On the night of the event, a chauffeured car waited outside her small apartment. Claire adjusted the hem of the borrowed gown, still unsure if she could breathe in the fabric. The dress was not couture. It was rented from a local boutique that did not usually serve millionaires. But when she looked at herself in the mirror, she whispered, "Dignity is not about the price tag. Just stand tall." Alexander, dressed in a tailored black suit, did not compliment her. Instead, he extended his arm with calculated precision. "Remember the rules," he said. "Stay close, speak little, smile when necessary, and most of all, do not falter." When they entered the ballroom, silence rippled like a wave. Dozens of glittering eyes turned to them. The crowd recognized him instantly, but the sight of Claire on his arm sent shock through the room. Some whispered with curiosity, others with ridicule. Phones lifted, flashes burst, the air alive with scandal. His ex, Serena, floated across the floor in a gown that shimmered like liquid silver. On her finger, a diamond the size of a marble caught the light and sparkled like a victory trophy. She smiled at Alexander with calculated cruelty before letting her gaze slide to Claire. Her eyes narrowed. Her lips curled into a dagger of mockery. "Well," Serena said, her voice dripping with sugar and poison, "you certainly have changed your taste." Laughter bubbled around them, brittle and sharp. Claire felt the sting of every sound. But before she could shrink, Alexander pulled her closer. His voice cut through the noise like steel. "She is not just my taste. She is unforgettable." The room gasped. For a heartbeat, even Serena faltered. Claire's pulse thundered. She wanted to believe his words, but she reminded herself it was all theater, every gesture rehearsed to wound his ex. Still, the way he held her hand, firm and steady, did not feel like performance. The rest of the evening became a relentless trial. Wealthy women whispered insults as if she could not hear them. Men smirked and asked crude questions about where Alexander had found her. Each moment tested her resolve. Yet Claire responded with quiet strength, answering with dignity rather than anger. And every time she steadied herself, Alexander's gaze lingered a little longer, as though seeing her not just as a pawn, but as something far more dangerous to his heart. As the night wore on, Alexander realized Serena was no longer the center of attention. The spotlight he had intended as a weapon against his ex was now shifting. Guests leaned toward Claire, curious, drawn by her unshaken composure. Even the musicians seemed to watch her when they played. The woman meant to be a shadow was turning into a light of her own. But in the world of power and envy, light attracted darkness. Serena's smile returned, sharper now, promising that this was only the beginning of her revenge. Claire felt it in her bones. Tonight had been a test, but many more battles lay ahead. Stay with me. Because what happened after that ballroom confrontation would prove that some rules of the contract were destined to break, and when they did, hearts would be exposed. The night of the gala ended, but the echo of it clung to Claire long after she left the ballroom. Her steps were unsteady when she walked out into the cool night air, her lungs aching for freedom from the suffocating perfume and judgmental whispers. The chauffeur opened the sleek black car door, and Alexander guided her inside with a firm hand on her back. Neither spoke during the ride. The city lights passed in silence, flashing across her face like fragments of a dream she could not quite grasp. She pressed her hands together in her lap, her heart still pounding from the weight of all those eyes. Every cruel word from Serena's lips replayed in her mind, yet so did his defense of her, the words that had silenced the entire room. She is unforgettable. When they arrived at his penthouse, towering above the city like its own kingdom, Claire hesitated at the threshold. The marble floors gleamed beneath her borrowed shoes, and the glass walls revealed a skyline of diamonds. She had never been inside such wealth. It felt like stepping onto another planet. Alexander poured himself a glass of whiskey, his jacket tossed onto a chair. He studied her quietly, as if she were a puzzle he could not solve. "You held your ground," he said at last. His tone was not warm, but it was not cold either. It was as though he was surprised by her. Claire lowered her eyes. "It was part of the contract." He moved closer, his gaze sharp. "No contract can teach dignity. That was yours." For a moment, the distance between them narrowed. She felt his presence too close, his breath too near, and the heat of something she did not expect surged inside her. The memory of his hand gripping hers at the gala returned, not as a staged performance, but as something that felt real. Her heel slipped on the smooth marble as she stepped back. A glass on the counter wobbled and tipped. Before it could shatter, his hand shot out, catching it in time. In that split second, her face was inches from his. His eyes locked on hers, and the air between them grew electric. Neither spoke, neither moved. The contract screamed in her mind, "Do not fall in love." She pulled away, breaking the moment. Her voice was unsteady. "You made the rules. I will not be the one to break them." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he set the glass down and turned toward the window, his back to her. Outside, the city glowed, restless and alive. Inside, silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Later that night, Claire stood on the balcony alone, the wind tugging at her dress. She stared out at the endless skyline, a world of riches that did not belong to her. Yet for the first time, she wondered what it might feel like if it did not matter where she came from. If, for once, she was not the outsider. Alexander watched her from inside, his reflection caught in the glass. He told himself it was strategy, that she was a pawn in a battle he had chosen. But the truth was more dangerous. She was no longer just a contract. She was becoming a mirror, showing him the emptiness of his pride and the loneliness of his victories. "Stay with me," because this night marked the beginning of a shift neither of them could deny, a crack in the wall of rules they had built, and through that crack something uninvited was already taking root. The days following the gala unfolded like a series of carefully staged performances. Claire quickly realized that her role as Alexander's contract companion was not confined to a single night under the chandeliers. It was an ongoing theater, each act played before a different audience with sharper eyes and harsher tongues. Within a week, she found herself dressed again in borrowed gowns, standing beside him at a charity dinner that shimmered with glassware and gold. Alexander introduced her to senators, investors, and patrons who measured her worth not by her words but by the cost of the necklace she did not wear. They smiled politely, their eyes cutting deep, whispering behind manicured hands. Yet Claire endured, answering questions with calm simplicity. When one guest sneered about her background, she replied gently, "Not every treasure is born from wealth." The table fell silent. Alexander, sipping his wine, almost allowed a smile to break across his lips. Another night, it was a fundraising gala for the city hospital. Paparazzi lined the entrance like wolves, cameras flashing the moment the black car door opened. Claire stepped out first, her hands steady in his, her eyes fixed forward despite the chorus of questions hurled in her direction. Who is she? How long have you been together? Is this love or another business deal? She did not flinch. She had learned that silence was her armor. Inside, Alexander noticed something that unsettled him. The guests did not laugh at her as they once did. Instead, some leaned closer, intrigued by her grace. It was not polish, not the refined charm of someone raised in wealth, but something raw and undeniable. She carried dignity like it was sewn into her skin. For a man who had spent his life surrounded by artifice, it was disarming. Between these public appearances, small moments began to bloom. In the back seat of limousines, silence stretched but no longer felt hostile. She adjusted his tie once before they entered a ballroom, her fingers brushing his collarbone for a fleeting second that neither acknowledged aloud. When she stumbled in unfamiliar heels, he caught her by the elbow, holding her longer than necessary. These details were not in the contract, yet they lingered in memory. Still, the world outside was not kind. Paparazzi followed them relentlessly, snapping pictures at every turn. One photograph, captured under the glow of streetlights, showed Alexander shielding Claire from the rain with his coat. The tabloids printed it with headlines screaming of romance. Another image, taken at the charity dinner, caught him watching her when she was not looking. The caption beneath it read, "Is the CEO falling for his mysterious companion?" Claire knew better. She reminded herself every night when she returned to her modest apartment that this was temporary. The ink on the contract was her cage, and she could not afford to forget it. Yet when she glanced at herself in the mirror, cheeks still warm from the memory of his hand on hers, the line between duty and desire blurred just a little more. Alexander, too, wrestled with a silence he could not explain. He had brought her into his world as a weapon, a performance crafted to sting Serena and to restore his pride. But in boardrooms and banquets, she became more than a pawn. She was a presence he could not ignore, a reminder that authenticity could outshine diamonds. And while the city whispered, while cameras hunted their every move, something unspoken was building between them. Stay with me, because the world was watching, the pressure was rising, and soon the facade they both clung to would crack under the weight of a scandal far greater than they expected. The attention that began as whispers soon exploded into a storm. Within days, every news outlet had plastered Alexander and Claire's faces across their front pages. The photographs from the charity events were twisted into headlines that burned through the city. Millionaire CEO's new flame or hired companion. From diner waitress to diamond balls. Who is she really? Paparazzi swarmed the penthouse gates, shouting questions, their flashes striking like lightning whenever the black car appeared. Claire had never felt so exposed. At the diner, where she once blended into the clatter of coffee mugs and the hum of tired customers, she now felt like a spectacle. Strangers pulled out their phones when she delivered their meals, snapping photos, some smiling with curiosity, others sneering with disdain. The tips on her tray doubled, but so did the cruelty and whispers she was never meant to hear. Gold digger. She must be desperate. How long before he throws her out? One evening, she returned to her apartment, her chest heavy with the weight of gossip she could not control. She sat at her small wooden desk, the drawer cracked open just enough for her fingers to brush against the cover of her notebook. She flipped it open, staring at the crooked lines she had written weeks ago. Save money for mom's treatment. Start a bakery. Live without fear. The words steadied her heartbeat, reminding her of who she was before the flashbulbs and marble floors tried to rewrite her identity. But privacy was not something the contract had guaranteed. The next morning, Alexander summoned her to his office. a towering glass building where the world below looked like toy blocks. Inside the boardroom, men in tailored suits circled like vultures. They wanted explanations. They wanted assurances. "Who is she really?" one demanded. "Does she threaten our image?" Another sneered. "The investors are unsettled. A scandal could cost us millions." Alexander's expression was carved from stone. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, and spoke with a voice that silenced them all. "She is with me. That is all you need to know." The words stunned Claire. For a moment, she forgot the ink on their contract and the rules that chained her role. It almost sounded like he was defending her, not the performance. But she reminded herself quickly. He was protecting his empire, not her heart. That evening, reporters cornered her on the street. Microphones thrust into her face, voices overlapping. "Are you in love with him? Were you hired to be his date? Do you have anything to say to Serena?" The barrage struck her like hailstones. She pressed her lips together, refusing to give them a single word. Silence became her last weapon. When she finally reached her apartment, exhaustion pressed her to the floor. She closed her eyes and wished for the quiet life she once had, even if it came with empty cupboards and late rent notices. But a knock at her door shattered the silence. Alexander stood there, framed by the dim hallway light. He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping across her modest space. The peeling wallpaper, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the worn sofa sagging with age. For a man accustomed to penthouses and silk curtains, it was a world apart. Yet his face carried no judgment, only something she could not name. "You are handling this better than I expected," he said finally. Claire folded her arms, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. Strength is not a choice when survival is the only option. His eyes lingered on her longer than they should have. Then his gaze fell to the notebook lying half-hidden on the desk. He did not ask about it, but curiosity flickered. She quickly slid it back into the drawer, guarding her last piece of private truth. Outside, the media fire burned hotter by the hour. Inside, the line between performance and reality thinned until it was almost invisible. Stay with me, because the scandal was only the beginning. What came next would shake both their worlds and prove that no contract could contain the truth that was rising between them. The storm of whispers turned into a tidal wave when Serena unleashed her strike. It was not enough for her to watch from a distance. She wanted devastation, and she knew exactly where to aim. News outlets erupted with headlines, "Millionaire CEO's love life exposed as a contract hoax. Paid companion or true partner?" Articles claimed that Claire had accepted money to pose as Alexander's girlfriend, quoting so-called insiders and presenting doctored evidence. Photographs twisted from charity galas now looked like proof of a charade. Claire read the stories in disbelief. She had no voice to fight back, no way to challenge the power of Serena's lies. At the diner, where she once served quietly, customers whispered and mocked. Strangers on the street called her a fraud. Her notebook sat unopened on the table, the ink of her dreams smudged by her tears. Alexander's world was no calmer. At his office, the board demanded explanations, their voices sharp with contempt. "You have jeopardized everything," one growled. Was she ever more than a hired distraction? He dismissed them, but their questions echoed in his mind. That evening he drove through the city, the contract's clauses replaying in his head. No emotions, no interference, no love. The rules he had written now haunted him. Could it be true? Had Claire betrayed him after all, selling their secret to the media for her own gain? His pride whispered yes. His heart resisted. Unable to silence the storm within, he went to her apartment. She opened the door, her face pale, her eyes red from sleepless nights. The newspaper lay on her counter, the headline circled in ink. "Tell me it is not true," he demanded, his voice low but trembling with fury. Claire's throat tightened. "You think I did this? Who else could have?" he snapped. "The story names details only you knew." Her voice cracked but held steady. "The only thing I ever wanted was enough money for my mother's medicine. I never wanted your world, Alexander. I never wanted any of this." For a moment, he faltered. The pain in her eyes pierced through his anger, but the poison of doubt was stronger. He turned away, his shoulders rigid, his pride shielding the ache in his chest. "The contract is over," he said coldly. his words cut deeper than any headline. Claire stood frozen as he left, the door slamming behind him. Alone in the silence, she pressed the notebook to her chest and whispered, "This is why you never believe in anything beyond survival. Stay with me, because what seemed like betrayal was only the surface. The truth was waiting to be uncovered, and when it surfaced, it would change everything." The night after he walked away, Alexander did not sleep. The echo of Claire's words haunted him. "The only thing I ever wanted was enough money for my mother's medicine. I never wanted your world." Her voice replayed in his head like a wound he could not close. He drowned himself in whiskey, staring at the city skyline, but even the lights of the towers he owned felt hollow. By morning, his private investigator returned with a folder. Inside lay the truth he had been too blind to see. Bank transfers, falsified witness statements, and manipulated photographs all traced back to Serena. She had orchestrated the leak, bribed tabloids, and twisted evidence, just to ruin Claire and reclaim her power over him. Alexander's hand tightened around the papers until his knuckles whitened. Guilt struck him like a blade. He had let Serena's venom poison his judgment. He had doubted the one woman who had endured humiliation, whispers, and flashing cameras without ever breaking her promise. Claire had stayed silent when others would have sold the truth, and he had repaid her with betrayal. That evening, he found himself again at the door of her small apartment. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and dust, so different from the perfumed marble halls he usually walked. For a long moment, he stood there, pride warring with regret. Finally, he knocked. Claire opened the door slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes guarded. She did not ask why he had come. She simply stepped aside, letting him enter. Inside, his gaze fell on the small desk. The worn leather notebook lay half open, pages filled with crooked handwriting. He reached for it gently, and though she tried to stop him, it was too late. The words stared back at him. "Save money for mom's treatment. Open a bakery. Live without fear." His chest tightened. These were not the words of a schemer. They were the dreams of a woman fighting for scraps of hope in a life that had given her little. "Claire," he said, his voice breaking, "I was wrong. I let my pride blind me. I let Serena's lies guide me when I should have trusted you." "Oh." She hugged the notebook to her chest, her chin trembling. "I do not need your pity, Alexander. I only ever needed honesty." He stepped closer, his defenses stripped away. "Not pity, respect, admiration, and something I swore I would never feel again." He paused, his voice raw. "I love you, Claire. Not because of what you pretended to be, but because of who you are when the world tries to crush you and you still stand tall." For the first time, her eyes softened, the walls she had built cracking under the weight of his confession. The silence between them shifted, no longer heavy but fragile, filled with possibility. "Stay with me, because what began as a contract built on pride was about to be rewritten by a truth far more powerful. The next step would not be business. It would be love declared before the world." The weight of silence between them did not last long. Alexander knew that words whispered in a small apartment would never be enough. The world had branded Claire a fraud, a contract bride, a lie. To heal what he had broken, he needed to do more than confess in private. He needed to stand before the same cameras that had once destroyed her and give the truth back to her in the open. The opportunity came days later, at a press conference already scheduled for his company. Dozens of reporters filled the hall, their cameras armed like weapons, ready to fire questions that could topple reputations. The headlines had not died down. If anything, they burned brighter. Everyone wanted to see the man who had been exposed by his own pride. Alexander stepped to the podium, the glare of lights sharp against his face. His voice was steady, carrying through the static of microphones. "You have all heard the rumors," he began. "You have seen the lies printed on front pages. Let me give you the truth. Claire was never a hired illusion. She was never a pawn. She is the only person who stood beside me without asking for anything in return." Gasps rippled across the room. Reporters leaned forward, cameras flashing like lightning storms. Alexander did not flinch. He turned, and from the front row, Claire looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. He left the podium, his footsteps echoing in the hushed room. Every gaze followed as he crossed the floor and stopped before her. From the inner pocket of his suit, he drew a small velvet box. The air seemed to freeze. Alexander knelt, not as a millionaire CEO commanding the city, but as a man stripped of titles, standing vulnerable before the only woman who had shown him what dignity truly meant. His voice broke with emotion. "Claire, once I asked you to sign a contract. Tonight, I am asking you to tear it up with me. No ink, no rules, no conditions. Marry me, not as part of a deal, but as the partner I should have been from the beginning. Marry me because my heart is yours." The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted. Flashes blinded the room, but none of it mattered. Claire's hands trembled as she covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. She did not see the lights, the cameras, or the hungry faces around them. She saw only him. Slowly she nodded. Her whisper carried through the hall, soft but strong. "Yes, Alexander. Yes." "Ah." Applause thundered, echoing like an earthquake. For once, the spotlight did not burn her. It crowned her. The girl once mocked for wearing a borrowed dress now stood as the woman chosen in front of the world. From that day forward, the headlines changed. No longer the fake date, no longer the contract companion. She was the woman who reminded the city that money cannot measure worth, that dignity cannot be bought, and that love, when real, does not need signatures to bind it. Stay with me, because this story leaves one lesson that outshines every scandal. True leadership and true love are not written in contracts. They are proven in action, sealed in authenticity, and lived in the courage to stand beside the one who holds your heart.